My wife covered my mouth before the ringtone finished. Red numbers glowed on the clock and bled across the nightstand. Her palm felt damp and cold against my lips. The sheets smelled like mint and old detergent. Something in her grip said danger now. "I'm Nolan Pierce, 35, I whispered into her hand. She shook once and set my phone on the pillow. The screen lit the fabric like a thin blue lake. The motor buzzed through the mattress springs. She tilted her head toward the hallway like a question. Silence, she breathed and drew her hand away. There, tasted metallic in a shadowed bedroom. A truck coughed somewhere beyond the window screen. My phone trembled again against the striped pillowcase. I felt my heart slam against bone. "Who is it?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. She sat up and watched the blackout curtains sway. The old lamp threw a weak halo over the dresser. Her hair brushed my cheek like dry grass. "Play it now," she said, but her eyes begged no. My thumb hovered above the cracked glass. The case felt slick with sweat in the dark. A faint hum leaked from the charging cable. Dust on the nightstand glittered in the phone's light. I tapped the message like striking a match. A click, then a hiss crawled through the speaker. I could hear wind moving over metal pipes. A bell chimed once like a breath held tight. My phone warmed under my fingers on the sheet. A man's voice spoke my name. "Nolan," he said, his tone careful and low. I smelled rain in the window draft above us. Keys on the dresser rattled like teeth in water. "Listen closely," he said, and the hiss deepened. My wife gripped the headboard. "End it," she whispered, eyes on the door. The wood floor creaked under the heating vent. I watched a shadow slide along the wardrobe handle. Her wedding ring flashed like a small lighthouse. I raised the volume instead. "Nolan," the voice said, "do not pause the tape." He breathed hard like he had been running. I pictured a payphone, though I knew better. Static crawled like ants across the mic. My wife pressed her heel into my calf. "Say something," I said, to make him real. My words bumped off the ceiling like dim echoes. My phone vibrated again against the blanket fold. The digital clock clicked to 18 with a soft tick. I felt a pulse inside my thumb. The voice continued, never raising above a whisper. I could hear water slapping against a loose panel. A chain clinked like a dog tag near the mic. Dust floated in the lamp glow above the nightstand. "Leave the house," he said, then breathed out. "Why?" I said, "because fear needs a reason." My wife reached for the glass on the coaster. The ice cracked and startled both of us. Cold water touched my wrist as she missed. "Please stop," she said, staring at the door. I slid off the bed and planted both feet. The rug felt rough and threaded under my toes. The doorknob gleamed like an eye in the half-light. Outside, a siren yawned and fell away slowly. I held the phone like a small bomb. "Tell me who you are," I said, steady now. The voice shifted like fabric against the jacket. I heard the echo of traffic under a bridge. The charging block clicked in the outlet near my ankle. "Friend," he said with no weight on it. My wife stood and crossed to the mirror. The glass held her like a second person stuck. Her breath fogged a crescent at the corner. I saw her fingers spread against the frame. She mouthed one word I could not read. "Say something useful," I said, forcing each word. The voice scratched like a needle on a record. A gull cried somewhere inside that hissy line. I glanced at the laundry basket by the chair. "Your door," he said, almost tender. Knuckles tapped once on wood from the hallway. The sound came soft, like someone testing grain. I could smell hallway dust and old paint. The door chain hung slack above the brass latch. My wife looked at me and shook hard. "Who was there?" I asked, planning to lie. I put the phone on the table by the lamp. The shade leaked yellow light onto the carpet. Footsteps brushed felt against felt outside the door. The tapping came again, exactly the same. "Do not answer," the voice said, almost inside us. He swallowed, and the mic caught the wet sound. The wind on his end pushed into the speaker. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the drawer. Its metal felt cool and perfect in my hand. My wife lifted the curtain edge with 2 fingers. Streetlight threw pale bars across our bedspread. A moth battered the glass like a tiny drum. Her shoulder blade moved like a small bird. "Car idling," she said, voice close to breaking. "How do you know us?" I said, louder now. My tongue tasted copper like I bit myself. The phone light curled wide across the wood grain. The digital clock kept burning through the dark. "Because I made a promise," he said. A shoe scraped outside like leather on grit. I could hear my breath bouncing inside the lampshade. The doormat fibers whispered under a shifting weight. I slid the flashlight toward the baseboard. My wife set her glass down too fast. "Call the police," I said and held her wrist. She reached for the landline on the small desk. The coiled cord hung like a black snake. A dial tone filled the room like fog. The tapping stopped on the other side. "Do not call," the voice said, sharper than before. He moved, and a chain hit metal near the mic. Water sloshed again like a bucket on a hook. I stared at the peephole and saw only green. "This is bigger than police," he said. "Then tell me," I said, choking on patience. The phone warmed my palm like a fever. The lampshade wore a thin ring of dust. My wife brushed it away and watched the door. "Not safe here," he said, then paused. My wife stepped back and grabbed the baseball bat. Its taped handle felt gritty against her skin. The air in the hallway cooled through the crack. A cigarette smell drifted near the bottom hinge. "Move the dresser," she whispered, still watching. We pressed our shoulders to the oak dresser. It groaned across the floor like a tired animal. Drawers rattled and spilled a sock onto the rug. My phone lay face down on the nightstand. The message kept playing, patient as tide. 30 minutes, the voice said, almost to himself. I heard a horn twice, then a distant laugh. He sniffed like blood had crossed his nose. The glass on the coaster sweated onto the table. "Leave before dawn," he said, then breathe again. "Where?" I asked, throat dry as salt. The taste of dust slid down with my swallow. Light from the street cut the room into stripes. The brass lamp switch clicked under my thumb. The voice hovered, then gave nothing. The tapping on the door returned, longer this time. A low scrape followed, like metal on paint. The peephole flickered with a moving shadow. The deadbolt felt cold against my knuckles. My wife lifted the bat like a prayer. "Say the word," she said, eyes locked on mine. Her whisper shook like paper in wind. The clock clicked again and chewed another second. The phone vibrated under the folded towel. I drew a breath that felt borrowed. "Finish the message," I said because I had to. The speaker popped like a vinyl scratch. The wind on his end fell to a hush. Something clattered near his mic like a coin. Then he spoke one word I did not know. I scrubbed the message back 1 second and listened. The speaker hissed like rain across tin. Blue light from the phone washed the bedsheet. A bell tolled once through static, then silence. His breath returned like a slow tide. "Barnaby," he whispered, and the word tasted salt. Seagulls cried in the distance through the line. The dresser's brass handle glinted in the lamp glow. 2 hours, he said, each syllable biting. My thumb trembled over the cracked glass. "Bathroom," she said, and tugged my sleeve hard. Water roared in the sink to drown our sounds. The mirror held our ghost faces under fluorescent light. My toothbrush rattled in its chipped ceramic cup. "Do nothing tonight," she said, eyes locked. "If you answer, they will hear us," he warned. Wind whistled past his mic like a narrow alley. The blackout curtain shivered against the window frame. My house key sat cold on the soap dish. "They are in your hall," he said, barely breathing. I killed the sound and watched the peephole glow. The hallway bulb hummed like a tired bee. A cigarette smell crept under the door sweep. The doormat bristled against my toes like straw. A shadow slid away like a stain. I raised the volume and held the phone close. "That bell means the slip by the buoy," he said. Metal clanked near him like a loose chain. I reached for a notebook by the radio. "Barnaby Street," he repeated, voice thinning. She tapped her ring against the glass with nerves. The click jumped in the small, bright room. "Hide the phone," she said, already moving. The fridge light spilled white across the floor. I buried the phone in the sugar jar. "Who are you to him?" I asked, keeping low. The exhaust fan whirred like distant surf. She wrote fast on a yellow, sticky note. The pen scratched the counter near the bread knife. "Not on this line," she said and underlined. The building settled with a soft wooden sigh. Outside, a car idled then faded into drizzle. Tape on the bat handle rasped under my grip. The hallway nightlight through a thin orange bar. My pulse counted seconds like nails. Locker 12, the voice said when I unmuted. I heard gulls again and the bell once. Left of the buoy sign at the docks. A coin clattered near his mouthpiece like proof. Bring nothing that chirps, he said, colder. Not tonight, she said, pointing toward the kitchen. The oven clock glowed green across the tiles. Gas from the burner smelled faint and clean. Her hand hovered over the ceramic salt pig. 2 hours from when? She asked, jaw tight. I wiped the phone with a dish towel. The cloth felt rough against the warm glass. A coffee mug steamed beside the cutting board. The fridge hummed and clicked like a metronome. We stood between choices like knives. If you love her, move, the voice said. A gull screamed and the bell tolled again. I stared at the knife block by the radio. Cold sweat crawled down my neck in threads. I saved the message with a hard press. You never save messages, she said, surprised and scared. The sink dripped steadily into the steel basin. Her mint breath fogged the mirror in a crescent. Her toothbrush fell and clacked against the tiles. We go to Barnaby, I said, and waited. I killed the lamp and grabbed the heavy flashlight. Cold air slid under the bedroom door like a blade. The clock bled red across the quiet nightstand. Her hand found my sleeve and squeezed once. Something waited on the other side. Shoes, she said, voice tight and hushed. I pulled on boots that smelled like wet leather. The laces scratched my fingers with dry grit. Keys clinked on the dresser and stung the quiet. We moved toward the kitchen like thieves. The hallway light buzzed and flickered near the frame. I held the deadbolt and listened for breathing. The peephole glowed with a sick yellow ring. A draft lifted the edge of the welcome mat. I slid the chain free and counted 3. We took the back door by the pantry. The knob felt oily from old cooking spray. A faint garlic smell clung to the wooden shelf. A cast iron skillet leaned against a stack of tins. We stepped into the stairwell shadows. Concrete steps sweated under my palm like stone. The stair rail rubbed skin with coal dust. Down below, a bike pedal clicked against metal. A weak bulb burned orange inside a wire cage. Footsteps skimmed the second landing and stopped. Keep moving, she said and lifted the bat. I heard fabric whisper along the chipped wall. My breath steamed in the dim like thin ghosts. A takeout menu slid from the corkboard. Something shifted in the dark one flight down. Who was there? I asked, forcing an even tone. A shoelace dragged against concrete like a snake. The smell of bleach rose from a mopped corner. An empty paint can rolled slow near a broom. Silence answered with teeth. We reached the laundry room door and paused. Washer lids stood open like metal mouths. A red sock clung to the rubber rim. The fluorescent hum sharpened and jittered above us. A shadow cut across the porthole glass. Go, she said, and nudged my shoulder. I pushed through and scanned a cracked tile. Detergent perfume hung thick around the table. A chipped basket waited under a missing sign. The exterior exit rattled once in its frame. Outside air slapped my face with wet cold. Streetlights smeared silver across the puddled alley. A trash bin groaned in the wind like a door. The brick felt damp beneath my free hand. Somewhere a bottle broke and kept ringing. We huddled by the old sedan and listened. The hood wore a skin of rain like glass. A lemon air freshener swung above the radio. Tires hissed on the avenue beyond the fence. The feeling of eyes crawled across my neck. Trunk, she said and passed me the bat. The metal key bit my fingers and stuck. A blue tarp rustled over a small toolbox. The smell of rust and oil rose fast. I pulled up a duffel and held it close. Check the wheel well, she said, almost a whisper. I crouched and touched the wet tire tread. Grit scraped my knuckles along the rim. A tiny red blink winked from a metal lip. Heat washed my face like a flare. What is that? I asked, already reaching. The magnet felt hot and smooth under grime. Static crackled from the radio with a hiss. A black square blinked again and stayed steady. She leaned close and smelled like mint. Do not smash it, she said, eyes narrowed. The alley light painted bars across her cheek. Rain drummed on the hood in hard bursts. A plastic zip tie cut into my thumb. We needed a place to bury this. I opened the toolbox and grabbed a socket. Steel chimed the night like small bells. My jacket brushed the fender with a wet squeak. The device came free with a soft click. I set it on the curb like a beetle. Glove box, she said, climbing into the seat. The door hinges squealed and bounced the sound. Paper maps crinkled under her quick hands. A roll of duct tape knocked against a lighter. We could turn their eyes somewhere else. I taped the device under the trash bin lid. The adhesive tore with a rough cloth sound. Rot smell blew from the can and punched hard. A dented soup can rolled over my boot. I pressed and felt the magnet bite. Lights off, she said, and killed the dome lamp. The dashboard glowed faint green with stubborn digits. Rain ran in beads down the windshield glass. The wipers squeaked once and froze mid-arc. I tasted fear and old coffee in my mouth. Seatbelt, I said, just to keep breathing. The strap dragged across my chest like sandpaper. She gripped the wheel until her knuckles blanched. The rear view showed our door in a crooked frame. An upstairs window opened like a blind eye. The engine coughed and then caught with a shiver. A loose coin rattled in the cup holder. The heater blew, dust that smelled like attic. Streetlight stripes crawled across the dashboard plastic. We rolled toward the alley mouth. Headlights swept past and painted our hood white. The sound of bass thumped through wet air. A cigarette ember floated near the chain link gate. A crushed beer can glittered beside a puddle. I eased the car behind a delivery truck. Left, she said, watching the mirror jaw-locked. The avenue opened with slick black lanes. Neon flickered on a bakery sign like a heartbeat. A box of rolls waited in the dark window. A pair of lights fell in behind us. Same car, I said, eyes on the mirror. The hum of tires rose to a steady growl. My hand found the flashlight on the seat. A parking meter flashed red near the curb. The lights kept their distance like hunters. Fire station, she said and tapped the map. Sirens slept behind the glass like coiled snakes. A brass hydrant leaned under the weak lamp. The smell of diesel drifted through the vent. We drifted past and waited for a move. The car behind edged closer by half a length. Its grille shone wet with a thin chrome smile. Rain ticked on the roof like nails. A flyer slapped a lamppost and tore free. I felt the decision sharpen like a key. I cut hard right and felt the tires bite. The wheel thumped against my palms with grit. Rain hammered the windshield and blurred the street. A horn bellowed behind us like a ship. Headlights smeared our hood white, then vanished. Again, she said, bracing a hand on the dash. The seatbelt rasped across my jacket like sandpaper. A streetlight poured copper glow over the wipers. The engine growled as I punched through a puddle. We aimed for water and the bell. Salt hit the vents like a slap to lungs. A buoy sign flashed reflective paint near a fence. Gulls cried over the river like broken hinges. The gate chain clinked once in the crosswind. I killed the lights and rolled dark. Hold, she said, watching the side mirror. Diesel breathed from the docks in slow waves. A dented dumpster loomed close beside her door. A passing grill swept light across our trunk. It kept going, then disappeared into rain. We slid out and closed the doors gentle. The handles felt slick and cold under fingers. Dock planks groaned like old bones under boots. A coil of rope lay, wet near a cleat. The bell tolled once beyond the slips. This way, she said, hood tied around her jaw. Fluorescence buzzed above an aluminum locker row. Fish brine burned my nose under the humming light. Numbers ran along the doors in black paint. 12 waited left of the buoy sign. A brass padlock hung fat and green with age. The metal tasted bitter on my thumb. I pulled the cutter from the duffel and aimed. Steel jaws kissed the shackle with a hollow ping. Fast, she said, eyes on the pier mouth. I bore down and felt the bar surrender. The cut rang through the row like a warning. Water slapped the pilings with impatient hands. I caught the padlock and stuffed it in pocket. She lifted the latch and yanked hard. The locker breathed out cold and stale air. A gray case sat on a folded towel. A paper envelope rested under a rubber band. The fluorescent light buzzed and wavered overhead. Open the case, she said, voice tight. I flipped the clasps and found a recorder. Its red eye blinked slow like a heartbeat. A tiny drive lay taped beside its screen. My fingers stuck to the foam with damp. Play it, she said, barely moving. Wait, I said, scanning the row for shadows. Boots squeaked somewhere beyond the ice machine. A sweet tobacco smell drifted into the aisle. Rain ticked on the corrugated roof in bursts. I thumbed the button and kept low. The same voice slid out, thinner and near. "Locker 12 holds proof," he said, breath scraping. Metal rattled near him like chain against railing. I stared at the envelope on the towel. "Take the drive," he said, "and follow the bell." I tucked the drive into the coin pocket. My jeans scraped the locker lip with a hiss. The envelope crackled like dry leaves in hand. A cheap rubber stamp marked a date in blue. "Not here," she whispered, tilting her head. A white cone of light swept across the wall. Keys jingled once near the vending machine. The locker doors shivered with a soft wave. A plastic bucket rolled and bumped my boot. I killed the recorder and held breath. "Anyone inside?" A man called, voice thick. His radio spat static, and then silence. Footsteps pattered water across the concrete. The beam sliced over a stack of crates. I slid the locker door a finger. We backed into cages of lobster traps. Wire bit my jacket like tiny thorns. There tasted like rust and fish. A broken buoy glowed under the buzzing strip. His light paused on our locker and held. "Cut lock," he said, radio pressed a chin. I heard another pair of steps answer close. Rain drummed harder on the tin roof. A broom leaned near my knee like a spear. "Check the row," he said, moving slow. I tossed the cut shackle toward the water. The splash smacked the pilings and bounced once. The sound drew his light down the walkway. The fluorescent flicker painted his jacket in stripes. "South end," he said, hurrying for the noise. "Now," she said, and pulled me the other way. My boots skidded on oil like ice. A red toolbox rattled when I bumped it. Gulls screamed above us like torn metal. We slipped behind the ice machine and ran. The exit sign bled green over a steel door. Its push bar felt gritty under my palm. A gust shoved rain needles into my face. A forklift beeped somewhere in the rain fog. We bolted into the maze of pallets. We crouched behind a crate stenciled with anchors. Pine soaked the air with sharp resin. A torn glove lay stiff near a skid. Footsteps veered past and faded toward the slips. I held the envelope and felt it throb. "Open it," she said, eyes on the dark. Paper tore clean with a low rip. A photo slid into my wet hand. Dock light washed our faces on glossy stock. We were leaving a cafe yesterday. I tasted metal as my tongue found fear. The photo corners bit like small knives. A shipping code ran in marker along the back. Under it a note said Dorcy, midnight. She tapped the words and did not blink. "Dorcy, where?" I asked, breath smoking. Her gaze drifted to a warehouse silhouette. Sodium lamps burned amber along its gutters. A bent sign on the fence held a map. She pointed once and tightened her hood. A forklift horn blared and jolted my spine. The crates threw long stripes across wet concrete. I tucked the photo inside the gray case. The recorder knocked against plastic with a click. "Move," she said, and we moved. We reached the fence and climbed the mesh. Wire bit my palms and lit them with fire. A torn tarp snapped loud near the corner. A blue barrel rolled and clanged against gravel. We dropped on the far side and crouched. Headlights combed the lot and stopped too close. The beams washed the fence with hard white. Rain pattered on the hood like thrown rice. A cigarette ember hovered by the driver window. I gripped the case until my knuckles shouted. The beam swung away and fell to the ramp. I could hear a radio laugh through a door. A rusty chain dragged behind a moving pallet. The map sign gleamed dull under the sodium. Dorcy waited like a mouth in brick. "Back to the car," she said, voice steady. Night pressed against us like wet wool. The duffel strap burned a red line on my shoulder. Puddles slapped our shins as we ran. I looked back at the warehouse and saw movement. I yanked the driver door and slid in fast. The seat foam felt soaked and cold through denim. Rain drummed the roof like a shaken tin. The key turned and the dash flickered green. Headlights carved the pier into a wet tunnel. "Go," she said, gripping the handle tight. Wipers thudded across glass with stubborn squeaks. Salt hung in the vents and stung my tongue. A plastic saint swung from the mirror. We left the bell behind us like a dare. We cut through side streets with the lights off. The engine hummed low, and mean underfoot. A receipt curled on the console like a pale snake. Neon smeared red across the wet windshield. Some car shadowed us 2 blocks back and held. Home first, she said, eyes on the mirror. The heater coughed dust that tasted like attic. A coffee lid rolled under her seat and stuck. Porch lights came and went like blinking buoys. I wanted walls around us before the next wave. I killed the engine and listened for footsteps. The rain softened to a hushed hiss. Our brass knocker glimmered weakly under the porch lamp. The welcome mat squished under my heel. Keys rattled in my hand like loose teeth. Inside smelled like lemon cleaner and damp wool. I set the gray case on the kitchen table. The fridge hummed and threw a thin white halo. A wooden spoon leaned in a jar like a spear. Fast, she whispered and locked the deadbolt. I cracked the clasps and pulled the recorder free. Its red light pulsed like a lazy vein. The tiny speaker hissed against my wrist. A chipped mug waited on the counter beside sugar. I thumbed play and braced for his voice. "If you hear this, the tide shifted," he said. His words scraped like gravel through the tin speaker. I stared at a dripping coat on the chair. "Use the drive and trust Rios for now." The name hit the table like a hammer. "Who is Rios?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. She lifted the kettle and set it back empty. Steam from the sink rose like a ghost curl. A spoon tapped the rim of the chipped mug. "Not a friend," she said and looked away. "Talk plain," I said and set down the case. The laminate felt tacky with old heat. She pulled a folded card from her jacket. Water spots dotted the black print like freckles. "My name is Eva," she said and held it. The room tilted with that single soft word. I tasted metal and swallowed hard against it. Her ring clicked once against the card edge. The fridge light blinked as if it heard. I folded the name into my chest like code. "I help investigators when I can," she said. Her voice had grit that sanded the silence. The burner phone buzzed inside her pocket. Its plastic back warmed her palm through denim. "Rios is missing," she said and watched me. "How deep?" I asked, gripping the table lip. The recorder crackled with a tiny dying wind. A salt shaker sat between us like neutral ground. A draft nipped ankles through the kitchen gap. "Deep enough to drown us," she said, steady. The motion light outside blinked on without warning. Whitewashed the blinds like a sudden wave. I grabbed the flashlight from the junk drawer. Batteries rattled inside like skittering stones. Something brushed the porch rail and held. "Mirror," Eva said and raised 2 fingers. The wall mirror caught a sliver of glass. A wet sleeve gleamed beyond the doorframe. The doorknob glittered with a bead of rain. We breathed through our teeth and waited. The recorder coughed and spilled one more line. "If they reach you, leave a window open." The speaker buzzed and then slipped to silence. A butter knife glinted under the stove light. "What kind of plan left windows open?" "Hide the drive," Eva said, snapping back. Cold bit my fingers when I opened the freezer. An ice tray clacked against the wire shelf. Peas in a green bag rubbed frost across skin. I slid the silver chip under the brittle ice. The doorbell chimed once and then again. Its tone fluttered like a small bell underwater. A damp footprint bloomed on the porch plank. Water pooled at the mat and lapped my shoe. "Who rings in a storm at this hour?" "Back door," Eva said, pointing past the stove. The hallway light spilled a weak yellow path. A cutting board leaned against the sink in shadow. I took the duffel and held the zipper. We stepped soft as breath toward the dark. The chime sounded a third time and stopped. A whisper of rubber slid along the glass. My hand sweated on the flashlight handle. A postcard on the fridge shook in the draft. Eva closed her eyes and counted under breath. 1 minute, she said, and opened them again. I smelled burned dust from the old heater. The broom bristles scratched my ankle as I moved. The deadbolt felt warm under my thumb. We would not wait for polite knocks anymore. I slid the back bolt and we slipped out. Cold air bit my throat under the porch light. The duffel scraped brick and soaked up rain. Our trash bin rocked in the wind like bait. Something shifted near the alley mouth and waited. "Fence," she said and took my wrist hard. Chain link rattled like coins under our weight. Wet metal chewed my palms with cold teeth. A cracked flower pot toppled and split on gravel. We dropped into the neighbor yard and ran. A dog barked twice behind a warped gate. Grease smoke drifted from a late kitchen fan. A bicycle frame leaned against a plastic slide. Streetlights smeared gold across the slick grass. Footsteps matched ours on the other side. Left to Broad, she said, breath cutting short. Neon buzzed above a diner with fogged windows. The doorbell pinged soft against the greasy glass. A sugar caddy slid when I bumped the booth. Coffee hissed on the griddle like rain. Payphone, I said, and fished out 2 quarters. The receiver felt oily and warm against skin. A map curled under the dusty plastic directory. Dial tone hummed flat through the metal mouth. Cab to the Harbor Arms, I said quickly. We waited in a corner booth and watched windows. Napkins leaned crooked inside a chrome dispenser. The waitress poured coffee that smelled like burnt nuts. A wall clock jumped its second hand in jolts. A man in a wet coat watched the door. Now, she said when headlights washed the diner sign. The cab idled with a diesel, tick and breath. Vinyl seats stuck to my back like tape. A pine tree freshener swung under the meter. The driver stared through rain and said nothing. 2 streets passed, she said, pointing at a flicker. A motel marquee sputtered orange above a railing. The office stank of bleach and old smoke. A brass bell chimed when I tapped the counter. The clerk slid key 14 with a plastic smile. We climbed to the balcony and kept low. Neon bled through the thin curtains like fire. Carpet fibers clung to my wet socks and clots. I set the gray case on the round table. The door chain clicked into its slot and held. Shower running, she said and twisted the knob. Water thundered in the tiled cave like cover. A Gideon Bible sagged on a nightstand under dust. The air conditioner rattled and spat cold breath. We made the room sound busy for ears. 3 soft knocks landed on the metal door. The peephole showed a blurred smear of hat. Cigarette smoke seeped through the frame like thread. A match flared and drew a bright circle. Open up and we fix this, a man said. I slid the chain tight and leaned into the door. Cigarette smoke leaked through the gap like warm rope. Neon bled red across the peephole glass. 3 knuckles tapped once and waited in silence. Step back, a man said, hat brim touching the lens. His breath fogged the metal like a tired kettle. I kept my palm on the cold chain. Say your name, I said and steadied the lamp. Rios, he said and raised a paper bag. Rain hissed on the rail and filled the air. A dark stain spread along the brown paper. Proof for you, he said, voice flat as driftwood. Eva lifted the chain a finger and stopped. The hallway bulb hummed and painted his cheekbones salt. A thin scar ran from ear to collar. Words from the tape, she said, eyes on his hands. Leave a window open, he said, then smiled once. The smile looked wrong under the buzzing strip. He held a key ring with a church coin. Metal clicked softly and tightened the air between us. He nudged the door and the chain screamed. The knob burned my palm with sudden heat. I raised the motel lamp and swung hard. Glass burst across the carpet like dry hail. He staggered and dropped the bag on tile. Whiskey smell rolled out and caught in my throat. A black tool clattered, sharp like teeth against metal. He cursed once and touched the fresh blood. You do not want Doris C tonight, he said. Neon pulsed red across the dripping chain. He showed a badge with a faded crest. The plastic gleamed under neon like a trap. If that is real, prove it now, Eva said. Outside, sirens stitched the night with urgent thread. A thin curtain breathed under the rattling unit. He whispered a date in a dead street. Eva nodded once and lowered the bat to carpet. We moved together, she said, voice steady and low. I grabbed the gray case and the recorder. He pointed at the bathroom window, glowing blue. I shoved the bathroom window and felt it stick. Cold air spilled over the tile like spilled milk. The shower roared and filled the room with steam. A plastic soap dish slid and clacked against porcelain. Knuckles thudded once on the motel door. Harder. Now, Rios said, and lifted the sagging frame. Streetlights smeared orange across the wet fire escape. Metal gritted under my palms like salt on iron. A dented bucket sat upside down near the sill. Boots scraped outside the room and paused to listen. We crawled onto the ladder and hugged the rail. Rain stitched my sleeves with cold needles and grit. A neon beer sign burned through the alley mist. A green dumpster yawned below us like a mouth. The ladder groaned once and then held. 3 steps, then jump, he said, eyes on the lot. Exhaust fumes rolled under the balcony like fog. A cracked ashtray lay drowned near a drain. I dropped with a duffel and felt knees scream. Eva landed beside me and kept moving. He hustled us behind a tan sedan. The trunk smelled like rubber and bleach inside. A wool blanket covered a first aid kit. He tossed in the paper bag and shut hard. Headlights slid by and washed our faces white. Keys, he said and snapped his fingers once. A key fob blinked weak under the street lamp. The car door clicked and the interior light died. A greasy fast food bag slumped in the footwell. I tasted old fries and fear together. We rolled out and kept under 20. The radio whispered static like moths and wires. Rios peeled a phone battery with quick nails. He dropped the SIM into an empty soda can. The can rattled under the seat like a warning. Bench the motel now, he said, jaw tightened. Rain braided the windshield in shaky ropes. A church steeple flashed once between the poles. The dashboard clock crawled toward a cruel minute. Eva gripped the handle and did not blink. He cut into downtown and killed the lights. A granite facade rose from puddles like cliffs. The lobby smelled like toner and cheap coffee. A revolving door turned slow under a flicker. Inside, he said and palmed a dented keycard. Fluorescence washed the newsroom in paper white. Monitors hummed along rows like aquarium glass. A heavy stapler sat crooked on a desk. A wall printer coughed out pages like smoke. A woman stepped from shadows and watched us. Maya, Rios said and wiped rain from his brow. Her leather notebook snapped open with a sting. She slid a sealable bag across the table. The zipper whispered as she tapped a silver label. Put the drive here, she said, eyes sharp. I set the recorder beside her laptop. The fan whirred and pushed warm dust at me. A USB adapter clicked into the shallow port. Blue light poured over the keys like frost. A file tree unfolded and named strangers. Playback 1, Maya said, barely above breath. Speakers crackled and bled a crowded echo. A metal door slammed near the recorded mic. A coffee ring glowed brown on her blotter. A captain's name fell out and stained everything. Rios rolled his sleeve and showed fresh stitches. Alcohol wipes flashed clean under the desk lamp. He set a sealed envelope under the keyboard. The paper puckered where blood had dried faint. If I go down, this moves, he said. The elevator dinged and turned our heads north. Light from the hall slid along the glass wall. A security badge reader blinked green once. A paperweight globe caught the glow and spun. Footsteps drifted closer with patient weight. Power the room, Maya said and killed 2 switches. The floor fell into a soft hospital dark. The printer tray creaked like a small animal. A cold draft licked my neck from the vents. The elevator dinged again and stayed open. The clock on her screen flipped to 3:17. My phone trembled deep in the duffel's lining. The vibration crawled up my forearm like ants. A metal chair leg scraped under my boot. Do not touch it, Eva whispered, eyes narrowed.